I woke up the morning after the first Women's March. I had been dreaming. I dreamt I was on the edge of a forest. It wasn't a dense forest. The hillside was covered with a thick layer of dry brown leaves. Under the leaves and mounds dotting the hillside were fires, not dangerous fires. Not fires with shooting flames, just glowing embers. They were sacred fires. And a woman sat at every mound, tending the sacred fire. I felt myself being lifted above the forest floor, lifted by the very energy of the sacred fires, and the next thing I knew, the energy swept me. I'm moving, I said aloud. I'm flying, and I was swept across the forest floor of glowing embers and sacred fires and beyond my dream. It had been one day since our return from the Women's March in Washington, and 1 week since our return from Myanmar. The dream had woven them both together with that week's Torah portion, the opening narratives of the book of Exodus. A fugitive from Egypt, Moses becomes a shepherd in the land of Midian. Herding his flock one day, Moses comes upon an unusual sight, a bush aflame. Spontaneous combustion isn't unusual in the heat of the desert, but Moses lingers longer than usual, long enough to notice that the bush is not being consumed in the flame. Glowing embers, a sacred fire. When God sees that Moses has taken the extra time to look and to notice, the voice of God calls to Moses from within the flame, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am, Hineni. Remove your shoes from upon your feet, for the place upon which you stand is holy ground." David and I had spent the first 2 weeks of that January in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, when Myanmar was a more hopeful and courageous place. One must remove shoes and socks before entering any temple or pagoda or any shrine containing a Buddha image. We spent probably half the trip barefoot. So much of Myanmar, Burma, is holy ground. Buddha images are tucked into niches carved out of caves, standing or reclining on mountaintops, inside temple ruins from the 11th century, and in living monasteries and temples built only recently. In all these places, our feet were in contact with the earth, sometimes in slippery caves, sometimes on dusty roads, sometimes traversing rushing water. The sense of the sacred permeated everything. Reminders of holiness are everywhere. The forest floor, layered with brown leaves, dotted with mounds of glowing embers, sacred fires, sacred energy. And who is tending the sacred fires? Women. A woman at every mound, tending the sacred fire. Women, sacred fires, sacred earth. Women. I am the lucky grandmother of 10 beautiful children. Our oldest grandchildren are already in high school. It's been a long time since our own 4 children were young, a long time since I was pregnant and gave birth to the 4 who would someday grow their own families. Much of those years is a blur, but the pregnancies and births, these I remember in vivid detail. I am lucky. I loved being pregnant. And birth, each of us here was birthed into life, a labor that hovers at the edge of life and death, a moment at once so scary and so wondrous that it is beyond description. Birth is the first and greatest drama. But for me, as for so many women, for so many families, this is not my whole story. 4 incredible children, 5 pregnancies, 1 I did not choose. Each birth hovers at the edge of life and death. That is why it is so scary and so wondrous. In so many ways, at this eve of a new year, all of life seems to be hovering at an edge, which is at once so scary and so wondrous. The sacred life we hold, the life of the planet Earth, the lives of our children, and our own life, it all feels like it's hanging in the balance. Tikiyah, the shofar blast that you will hear tomorrow, wherever in the world Jews gather, is followed by this great announcement, Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the birth of the world, or more accurately, today is pregnant with the world. Today is pregnant. This Rosh Hashanah of 2022, we are asked to face the challenges of an America where pregnancy is no longer a choice, where the edge of wondrous and scary is replaced by fear and coercion. Stories of birth, of pregnancies dreamed of, or pregnancies dreaded, stories of choice and of abortion. These are stories of women, they are stories of men and of families, of rabbis and physicians. They are stories of tenderness and stories of courage. Harold Kudan, now 90 years old, grew up in an Orthodox family in the Adirondacks. His first post as a young rabbi was as a prison chaplain. It was a woman in prison who challenged him on his anti-abortion views. This was in the early 1960s, a decade before the Supreme Court affirmed the right of women for abortion care in Roe v. Wade in 1973. She was serving time in prison for performing abortions. Her stories of the women who sought help shook him to his core. Rabbi Kudan would go on to march in Selma with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and form the core of a different underground railroad, a group of clergy that became known as the Clergy Consultation Service. Operating in an underground network of clergy and physicians, in their one Chicago chapter alone, they moved 10,000 women to safe reproductive care in the 5 years from 1969 to 1973, and the years before Roe made abortion legal. During those years in the clergy network, another member, Rabbi Max Chickton, Hillel director at the University of Chicago, was arrested for setting up an abortion in neighboring Michigan. The woman who had sought his help turned out to be an undercover cop. The Chicago police executed a search warrant on Chickton's home, where they found a trove of files they hoped would lead them to other clergy in the network. But Chickton, who died in 2016, was apparently prepared for such a raid. He did all his files in Hebrew, recalled Rabbi Larry Kushner, who was another member of the Chicago network. He joked about that. That made them useless, unless the cops could read Hebrew cursive. Rabbi Larry Kushner, now 79 and living in San Francisco, and one of our most respected authors and teachers, remembered that he was scared enough about the risks of helping women that he carried a bail bond card in his wallet all the time. Abortion is a story about men and women. Abortion is a story about all of us. Tikiyah, Hayom Harat Olam. In 1969, before abortion was legal, I was a fourth-year medical student, writes Michael Berman, on my OB/GYN rotation at Metropolitan Hospital in New York City. One of our responsibilities was to participate in the care of patients on the gynecology septic service, an entire floor of the hospital devoted to women in septic shock as a result of self-inflicted abortion attempts, or from illegal abortions available on the street. Women were dying each day with us at their bedside. These tragedies were preventable. When New York legalized abortion, the septic service disappeared. Access to legal and safe abortion care must be preserved. Where access is denied and criminalized, hospitals will once again need to open floors for septic service, and women will once again unnecessarily die. Hayom Harat Olam. Today is pregnant with the world. Abortion is a story about men and about women. It is about patients and doctors and partners and parents and rabbis and judges. Abortion is a story about dignity and civil liberties, respect, autonomy, family, and religious freedom. We all have a stake in this moment. Everyone, and I mean everyone, loves someone who had an abortion. These are stories that need to be shared without shame or stigma. Celebrated author, activist, and founding editor of Ms. Magazine, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, remembers from her pre-Roe college years writing this summer in Hadassah Magazine, excerpted from a forthcoming book. My unwanted pregnancies were far and away the most shameful secrets of my youth. I didn't confide in anyone. The idea that any of my upstanding female relatives might excuse my transgression, much less know where to seek help, was beyond my imagination. Much later on, I discovered that the 3 women closest to me in the world, my adored sister, mother, and grandmother, had all had abortions. But at that time, rather than face their judgment, I decided I would kill myself. Hayom Harat Olam. Today, pregnant. What to do? With no access to a weapon or a lethal drug, and being too squeamish to slash my wrists, I narrowed my options to leaping off the Bronx Whitestone Bridge or jumping in front of a moving subway. My roommate, Selma Shapiro, noting my distress, kept hounding me to tell her what was wrong. Finally, I blurted out the truth. She let me cry on her shoulder, then walked me downstairs to the quarters of our dorm counselor, Liesl Judge, whose day job was coaching the Brandeis women's fencing team, but who also served as an unshakable, unflappable confidant to female students. Liesl comforted me without making a big deal of it. She said I wasn't a bad person. The next morning, she plugged me into an underground network of abortion whisperers and directed me not to a seedy back alley abortionist, but to a licensed physician, the saintly, soon-to-be legendary, Dr. Robert Spencer. I called for an appointment, trembling with anxiety. Dr. Spencer's plain-spoken nurse told me what to expect and what to pack for my overnight stay at the doctor's clinic in Ashland, Pennsylvania. Oh, and one more thing. Should I have a car accident or get stopped for any reason on the New Jersey or Pennsylvania turnpikes, she said I was to tell the trooper that I was a patient of Dr. Spencer's. That sounded bizarre, but the nurse was matter-of-fact. For years afterward, I heard parallel accounts from other women who'd been patients of Dr. Spencer, several of whom claimed to know why his name worked as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Apocryphal or not, the story was that the good doctor had once saved the life of a trooper's daughter who was near death from a botched kitchen table procedure. And since that time, the officer's colleagues up and down the highways in both states had been protecting Dr. Spencer and his patients, and when necessary, sending their own wives and daughters to his clinic. By the time he died, Dr. Spencer had performed more than 100,000 safe abortions in his spotless clinic. Her postscript: I will be forever grateful to Selma, a lifelong friend, to Liesl, my dorm counselor who died in 2017 at 101, and above all to the non-judgmental Dr. Spencer. It was his commitment to women's autonomy, not to the state or someone else's religious beliefs, that allowed me to graduate with my class, move on with my life, and wait until I was ready to settle down with a loving mate and establish a stable home in which our children would be welcomed, cherished, and nurtured to adulthood. A loving mate, a stable home, children loved and cherished and nurtured. These are all foundational and aspirational Jewish values. The dignity and life of a woman is a Jewish value for all Jews, Orthodox or Reform. Rabbi Sarah Horowitz, the first Orthodox woman publicly ordained, writes, "Our tradition is one of compassion. Orthodox Judaism's view of abortion does not align with the Catholic Church or the Christian rite of today. Maybe it's a story about forced pregnancy, an abusive relationship, a fetus with a serious medical condition, a woman with a physical or mental disorder. Although we shouldn't need any justification for an abortion, Jewish law leads with compassion. It's no coincidence that the Hebrew word for womb is rechem, which forms the root of the word rachamim, or compassion. Hayom harat olam. Today is pregnant. What do we do? In choosing life, Jewish tradition teaches that there are times we must say no to pregnancy in order to say yes to life. Hayom harat olam. Sacred women, sacred earth. Sacred earth, the mother of us all. She is in danger. Take her temperature and check her vitals. She's burning up. Her oceans are filled with plastic and it is choking her life. She is dying of dehydration. Hayom harat olam. Hayom, today. Mother Earth is having trouble sustaining her life. Global climate change is not a future problem. Droughts, wildfires, and extreme rainfall are happening faster than scientists previously assessed. I don't need to cite the statistics for you. You may also have children or grandchildren who live in zones that are at high risk for forest fires. You may have nearly lost your home or your life a year ago at this time in the flooding from Hurricane Ida. You may have traveled to Europe this summer to find that your lakeside rental was instead stranded on a rocky beach. The lake practically disappeared from view. Mother Earth is hurting, and as a consequence, so are we. A young 23-year-old here at Kol Ami expressed his cynicism about the future to his mother, saying he doesn't expect to live to see 40. Some catastrophic climate event is bound to happen before then, and he is hardly alone. More than half of young couples are reluctant to bring children into the world. Moses, the place where you are standing is holy ground. Every place where you are standing is holy ground, and all of us will need to tend the sacred fires. Moses, Hineni, here I am. People are noticing and taking action. Renewable energy sources keep getting cheaper. Conservation efforts have led to coral reefs coming back to life. People are working to solve our plastic waste problem, and major universities and whole countries have stopped investing in fossil fuels. Hineni, here I am. Greenland announced that it would suspend all new oil and gas exploration to fight climate change and focus on sustainable energy development. Estimates from the U.S. Geological Survey say that it could hold more than 17 billion barrels of oil. Despite this, the country has stopped future exploration because the price of oil extraction is too high. Hineni, here I am. Our joint houses of Congress passed the first significant legislation to combat climate change and support renewable energy. And New York State has climate change on the ballot in November. Hineni, here I am. Young climate activists tell us we cannot afford to despair. Despair translates as, I give up. There's nothing I can do. There is too much at stake. Too much at stake for comprehensive and accessible medical care, for religious freedom, for our lives and the life of the earth. Hineni, we must answer the call. The beautiful photograph on the card at your seat was taken by Judith Boyce and forms the cover of a book published by the Sierra Club in 1992. Its powerful imagery of the earth reminds us how connected it all is. On the other side of the card are actions we might take this year, this Rosh Hashanah. The Religious Action Center of New York has undertaken a climate covenant, a 3-year initiative to support legislative change for a healthier environment for all of us. The first initiative is Turn the Ballot Over. In the November elections, all the candidates will be listed on one side of your ballot. Turn the ballot over to see the state initiatives. One of them is the environmental bond issue, to set aside $4.2 billion for projects to create cleaner water, cleaner air, and to support the creation of green jobs. It is also time that progressive religious voices step into the public sphere in support of reproductive justice. A first gathering led by women, clergy, Christian, and Jewish will take place this Thursday at Scarsdale Congregational Church. You will find that information as well on the back of the card. This Rosh Hashanah, we are scared and more worried than ever, but we hear the call, Hineni, and we are not powerless. And the people say, Amen. We can vote. We can volunteer as poll workers. We can remind our college students to vote. If every citizen voted, America would be a more hopeful, just, and compassionate place. And the people say, Amen. We affirm that every body is sacred, and that holiness is embedded within each of us and within creation. And the people say, Amen. We can set aside despair and face the serious challenges of global climate change. We will demand bold policies to create a sustainable world for ourselves and generations to come. And the people say, Amen. We are a holy community. We know how to love, how to dance, how to march, how to pray, how to connect, and how to hope. We can do more, and we will. And the people say, Amen. Ve'imeru kol ha'am. Amen.